Welcome to this Academy for Teachers Masterclass on Claudius's Soliloquy, What We Can Learn from Hamlet's Villain with Ramie Targoff. I'm Katie Bolger, and I have been teaching Humanities at for the past 24 years at City of School High School in Manhattan. I came to teaching at 40 years old, and from my junior year in high school until I began teaching high school, I avoided Shakespeare. Yeah, I was terrified of Shakespeare. But as a newly minted English teacher, I could no longer hide my fear, so I dug into Hamlet, and I kept digging. And it was quite a few years, before the light went on and the words on the page became more than words. But like a new language, I became fluent in Shakespeare. And I've just gone down in my... And Shakespeare is the reason that I'm at the Academy for Teachers. I came to a workshop about 5 years ago with Oscar Eustis and Julius Caesar. Oscar, of course, being the artistic director of the Public Theater. And I'm still basking in that day in Oscar's brilliance. But of course, that day and this moment would not happen without the Academy for Teachers. We know that many of the slings and arrows that we take as teachers over time disappear with the smile of a student, or the light bulb going off in the classroom, or a nod of respect from someone outside of our world. And for that, I am grateful to the Academy. Thank you. So I have the honor today of introducing Professor Ramie Targoff, who teaches at Brandeis University. Her field is Renaissance literature with emphasis on lyric poetry and women's writing. She has written books on Common Prayer, John Donne, and Renaissance love poetry, including her new book on Vittoria Colonna, the first woman to publish a book of poetry in Italy. So for me, Professor Targoff's description of this workshop seemed to be like a door into this complicated and layered play. I mean, why this monologue? What is it that happens with Claudius in his private moment of despair that illuminates the villain? I'm here to find out. But Ramy, you are not the only star on the stage tonight or today. It is also my honor to introduce the 21 teachers here today, selected from many applicants. And here is who we are. We teach grades 6 through 12 in public, charter, and independent schools. We have advanced degrees in journalism, linguistics, education, theater, and literature. We teach Shakespeare, film, intro to theater, theater for social justice, songwriting, acting, and directing, as well as English, ESL, and AP English literature, and so many more classes than I can list here. And we have been teaching for a total of 333 years. A little pat on the back for all of us. We look good. We teach between 50 and 300 kids, and the number of children who know our names is 2,910 this year. So your real audience today, Professor Targoff, are those 2,910 children, because every teacher here will in some way bring back and share with them what we learn from you. The ripple effect of a masterclass is huge. So thank you, Professor Targoff, for being here, and thanks to all of my fellow teachers for teaching. And with that, Ramy, let the masterclass begin.
Great. So it might have seemed perverse to choose the soliloquy, one of the soliloquies not spoken by Hamlet, to focus on for this masterclass. But I think I hope that I will convince you that this, if you haven't already been convinced, that the soliloquy is totally fascinating and one of the keys to understanding something very deep about the play. So I very briefly want to just tell you my history with this soliloquy, which is rather long, and then I put a PowerPoint together. I want us actually to work our way through the soliloquy, during which we will be having lots of interesting conversations. But I really think the only way to get anything out of a text like this is to go deep into the weeds of it. So we're going to do that, I hope, together, and I hope that will be fun. I was almost now, I guess 25, 27 years ago, some years ago, writing a dissertation at UC Berkeley on prayer, on the performance of prayer. And the dissertation came out of a set of observations about this soliloquy. So this is a soliloquy that I have been living with in different ways for several decades. But I was specifically interested at the time in how this particular performance, and I think performance is a very important word here, of prayer is connected to and different from theatrical performance in Hamlet. So what it is about this performance that trips Hamlet up, basically. Why can't Hamlet get that Claudius is failing at what he's doing? What does it mean that this scene happens directly after Hamlet says, the play is the thing where I'll catch the conscience of the king, where Claudius's guilt comes up to the surface after watching a play. And so behind all of this is a really interesting historical and religious and cultural set of questions about religious performance and theatrical performance, and which kinds of performances produce which kinds of affective, whether it's to confess or to get access to certain kinds of revelations. How is it that a prayer can or cannot work the same way watching a theatrical play can? So Claudius can see a play and feel moved, right? And he starts, feeling all these feelings of guilt. But then what happens when he tries to do something with that? And so all of this is part of a larger story in the Renaissance about public prayer and about praying together. This is a new idea. This was a new idea at the time, that you should pray in English, that everyone should watch one another. There are amazing, amazing comments made during the period that if your neighbor isn't praying sincerely and issues a dirty amen, it's going to mess up your prayer. So the idea that we're all kind of watching each other and seeing what we're doing. This is a play obsessed with watching one another, with everyone, either pretending to be doing something, hiding behind the arras, right? Staging conversations. So what does it mean that Claudius is trying to probe Hamlet's mystery, that Hamlet is trying to probe Claudius's mystery, that everyone is trying to find everyone else's secrets? And so all of that, I think, comes to a head in this speech. I think this speech is really, really central to so many things that are going on in the play. So as I say, I want to go through it. So what I've done is, I'm sure now we all, for better or worse, very familiar with sharing our screen with our students. So I'm going to share my screen. I have a PowerPoint, which is basically going to walk us through. I would love this to be as interactive as if we were all in a graduate seminar together. I really don't want to lecture, and I think it's nice, I'm sure, for you guys to have adult conversation about literature and not be talking to our students. So so let's use the raise hand function if everyone can, and if not, you can just go like this. But I really would like to have a conversation. So I'm gonna just get this up now. Okay. Okay, so so what I thought we would do is just go through this slide by slide, and I would love not to read. So can somebody, we'll sort of go around, but can somebody get us started? Anybody willing to read? No one is willing to read. Thank you. Let me see, you were in my group with me. John, sorry, your name didn't come up. John, would you mind reading this first slide?
Yeah, no problem. Just like as a heads up, I'm not an actor, so this is—
That's fine. None of us makes to be an actor.
Fluent, but not exciting. Oh, my offense is rank. It smells to heaven. It hath the primal eldest curse upon it, a brother's murder. Pray I cannot. Though inclination be as sharp as will, my stronger guilt defeats my strong intent. And like a man to double business bound, I stand in pause where I shall first begin and both neglect.
Okay, excellent. So this is, again, this is our first time in the play seeing Claudius by himself. And I just want to pause to just take in what it means. And this is something I love about Shakespeare, and I hope other people appreciate that. Claudius is our villain. We have absolutely no reason to be sympathetic to Claudius. We have lots of reason to dislike Claudius. Shakespeare goes out of his way here to put him in a position where we can at least understand him, if not sympathize with him, but to give us private access to our villain, right? To someone who should be sort of off screen, and say, I'm going to devote this scene to Claudius's inner anguish, I think is an extraordinary decision, just as a creative act. So it's also the first time, and this is so important, that Claudius admits that he's guilty. So Hamlet has been trying everything to find out, right? He thinks, he needs to stage the play to get him to admit his guilt, to see a sign. And again, we're always reading people's faces and expressions because no one knows what anyone else is actually thinking or doing. And so when Claudius opens the soliloquy, my offense is rank. It smells to heaven. It has, in case we're not sure what his offense is, he then immediately compares himself to Cain, right? It has the primal eldest curse upon a brother's murder. So he says the words of brother's murder. So then that's it. I mean, it's on the table now. But then that's where I think this speech gets really interesting. So that line, the third line, a brother's murder, period. Pray, can I not? So that's the problem. So the problem that the soliloquy, I think, is posing is, and that Claudius is going to work his way through, is what does it mean to be very aware of your guilt and to be unable to do anything about it, right? What kinds of mechanisms are available? So he's obviously trying to pray and says he can't. And then we get an explanation in the rest of these opening lines. So what's going on if we just look at those next 4 or 5 lines? There's a set of binaries here, a set of oppositions that keep structuring it. Inclination, will, guilt, intent, double business, he says. He's divided. So can anybody jump in here? What is the problem? Why can't he pray? What's stopping him from praying?
Yeah, I have an idea.
Uh-huh.
I mean, as it goes on in the soliloquy, he's saying the purpose of praying would either be to express, to do as a confession or as an apology, and he can't do either. He can't admit that he did the deed, but he also can't, if he has the queen, the office, and everything that he got from the murder, then he can't really claim to be, he can't pray because he can't honestly adopt the attitude of prayer.
Okay. So yeah, David, that's definitely a lot of what's going on. He hasn't even gotten there yet, right? So if we think about what he's saying, because you're absolutely right, and he's going to explain this, but what you just said, he can't begin his prayer. And the reason he can't begin his prayer, as he's describing it now, is that there's a sort of problem. What is the problem that he's describing? If all we saw was this set of lines, what is the problem that he's describing?
So are you asking me?
No, I think I'll
That's fine.
I'll call it someone else just for fun. Jessica?
I'm not sure if I'm on with this, but like when you were talking about the double and the binaries that he was experiencing before, I remember from my high school class just that like one of the big problems in the play is that like Hamlet himself is stuck between like action and inaction, and so it seems like Claudius is also in that kind of gray space where he's not really able to either act nor not act because he wants to do this one thing, but like David was saying, he can't because he still has everything that he reaped from this terrible thing he did. Okay, yeah, and I think Jessica, there are so many interesting parallels between Hamlet and Claudius in this play, and I think that's one. Remember, he's a man of action. The opening scene of the play, he's dispatching people on missions. He's doing, he's really effective as a ruler. That's one of the ironies. Is like how the Macbeths are the best marriage in all of Shakespeare.
Claudius is probably the best king. He's really good at being king. He actually gets a lot of stuff done. He knows how to be king. But he's stuck here, as you say. So as I say, and I always do this with my students, I don't know if you guys do, but I always say, like, pretend this is all we know are these 8 lines, right? So what's the problem that he's describing? He can't pray. Why? Yeah, Katie?
This makes me think of when I was a girl. I was raised as a Catholic, and I couldn't sleep at night. It was too warm or whatever it was. And my mother would say, "Oh, it's because you have a guilty conscience." I'm like 8 years old. I mean, what could I be guilty about? But a guilty conscience was what my mother, in a religious point of view, would say was keeping me from doing what I needed to do, which is sleep.
Okay, yeah, so I think that's absolutely right. I don't know about your guilt as a child, but I think the key line here is my stronger guilt defeats my strong intent. So however intent he is, however much he wants to pray, he's being hindered by the weight of guilt is stopping him. Yeah, Derek?
I guess I wonder how much he wants to pray.
Yeah.
If it's possible to read him or this line as, he thinks his intent is strong, but his intent is really not that strong. So maybe he's sort of misreading or lying to himself or lying to us.
Yeah, and that's a really important question, which is gonna, let's keep that question alive, as it were. Sharon?
I think, kind of piggybacking onto what Derek just said, initially I'm looking at that guilt line, and I would describe it as a paralysis of guilt. But then when I look at the next line, the section about being bound to a double business so that he doesn't know which thing to do first, then I look back and I think, but what are the two? Because the guilt and the intent should be together. To me, it's one thing. Because I feel guilty, my intention is to pray. So it's hard for me to see what he's torn between.
Okay, yeah. And I mean, I think let's hold on to both of those last 2 comments, because this is an artificial exercise to look only at these lines. This is going to become clear, but I think you're absolutely right that his intent shouldn't be so overwhelmed by his guilt, but there's something, to get back to what Derek was saying, there's something that's holding him back. Okay, Bob, and then Miriam, and then Rebecca, and then we'll go to the next slide.
Yeah, I just, again, probably enlarging on the previous 2 comments. His prayer is self-serving. It's not really repentance. He just wants to not feel the guilt that he's feeling. It's very consistent with his character. I mean, he committed the crime in his own self-interest, and now he wants to not feel guilty. But I think even he realizes that any prayer is just self-serving. It's not really repentance.
Okay, yeah. So these are really important questions. Rebecca? Oh, we can't hear you, Rebecca.
Sort of double business of that he, again, just to build on what was just said, he wants to feel bad about his crime, but he also enjoys it.
Yes, and that's right, and he's going to expand that. So if he really wanted to pray, would he be able to? But he says he doesn't even know where to begin. So what's being represented as a kind of mechanical problem, right? How am I going to begin this prayer? Turns out, of course, to be something else. Miriam?
Just to add what people are saying, when he says, like a man to double business bound, I stand and pause where I shall first begin and both neglect. He's kind of multitasking. So he's like, I'm trying to do 2 things at once, or I'm doing 2 things. One of them is this really strong, guilty thing I did is way more powerful than my prayer. That one outweighs the other. And he's like, and therefore neither of these, even the emotion of guilt and the intent, both are going to be negligible, since one is overpowering the other.
Okay, yeah, that's really, really good. Okay, let's keep going. Miriam, you want to just read this slide?
Sure.
Since you're still unmuted. And since we went to high school together, everybody, just so you know.
What if this cursed hand were thicker than itself with brother's blood? Is there not rain enough in the sweet heavens to wash it white as snow? Whereto serves mercy but to confront the visage of offense? And what's in prayer but this twofold force? To be forestalled ere we come to fall, or pardoned being down. Then I'll look up.
Okay, so just to kind of back up and then so we start with a problem, which is I can't pray, right? Pray can I not? He's overwhelmed by guilt. So the question is how to make reparations, right? How to atone. Is he really in a position to atone and so forth? But he says he doesn't even know where to start. He's completely blocked. And then we get this extraordinary set of questions. So one after another. So what are these questions doing? What is he asking here? If you were sort of painting this, like what color is this compared to where we just were? John?
If I were to color this, I'm not sure, but the question,
you don't have to answer that.
Yeah, no, the question that I just think is so good and so important to continue to think about forever is where to serves mercy, but to confront the visage of offense. Like the role of mercy and like what mercy means. I don't know the answer to that question myself, but I know that it is like a deeply interesting theological and political and philosophical question in terms of what mercy can reveal, and if it actually reveals anything, our true self. The role of mercy, I think, in this, and the extent to which we're willing to like dole out mercy is even Shakespeare was too smart to be self-righteous, I think, and so he opens up the play to mercy even for his worst characters, and so I think this is a good example of this kind of shift into really thinking about the nature of mercy and prayer, and I don't have anything else to say, but I just love that line.
Yeah, I mean, that's wonderful comments, and I'm sure you guys all know Portia's speech about mercy in The Merchant of Venice, and that was written a few years earlier, but this is something Shakespeare was thinking a lot about. Let me hear from a few other people, and then I have a few more comments. Michael, and then Daniel. Michael Porter, in case there's another Michael. No, I think
Hi. The first question about the blood on his hand reminds me of Macbeth's line, will all great Neptune's oceans wash the blood clean from this hand? So that's an idea that Shakespeare will come back to in Macbeth. Like, how can I get the blood off my hands and be clean again? The second question seems to be like, what's the purpose of mercy? The purpose of mercy should be to forgive people of their offenses. And then the next question is, what's the purpose of prayer? It should either be to stop us before we fall into sin, or when we're down for some, when we've already fallen into sin, pardon us somehow and let us stand back up. And then you have the nice pairing of the being down, then I'll look up at the end there.
Yeah. Thank you. Daniel, and then Bob.
Forgive any lag in my internet at the moment, but yeah, to go to add on to what John was saying before, not only mercy for his worst character, but mercy for the worst possible offense that could ever be, right? So he seems to be using an image that's outlandish, that's not really realistic. If my hand was thicker than itself with brother's blood, well, that's not really possible, right? So if the offense was so great that it's not even conceivable, if the blood was so thick that we can't even really fathom it in reality, well, that's what prayer is for. Prayer is for this. Doesn't matter how bad my situation is, right? It doesn't matter how bad my situation is. That's the whole purpose of prayer in the first place. So. Right. Let me give it a try. These are the problems that I'm having. Well, that's what prayer is supposed to fix anyway.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, one really interesting difference is if we just go back for a second. So here he's imagining that the capacity to pray and to be forgiven is all on him, which is both an act of acknowledging his guilt, but also an act of arrogance. It's what Luther would say, how dare you think that, Luther was against, for example, individual confession, because he thought God isn't interested in your particular confession, right? You're just a little worm. I mean, you don't count for anything. It's God's mercy, to get back to the first comment, right? God's mercy is going to extend over you, is so much bigger. Like Jesus died for all of humanity's sins. You're not going to be able to make any compensation. So in the first speech, in the first set of lines, he's imagining, as I say, both in sort of abjection, but also in way, some kind of arrogance, that it's all up to him whether he can do this. And then here, each of these questions, as you guys were just saying, is as if he's all of a sudden a kind of faithful Christian. Isn't God's mercy, isn't there enough rain in the heavens to clean my hands, right? I don't need to be responsible myself. Isn't there enough goodness in God in the heavens to shine upon me? Can't mercy confront this offense, right? And can't prayer do these things? So all of a sudden the scale goes from me, and what can I do for myself to, aren't there beneficent forces in this universe that can come in and intervene? And he gets so excited about that he says, then I'll look up, right? It's like he believes that for a minute. He's really on that. There were a couple more hands, and then I want to keep moving, because as I might have said at the beginning, but we could talk about this, or at least I could talk about this for 5 hours, and we only have one. So we're going to have to keep moving. But that's what I always tell my students too. Like, you can take a sonnet and you could read it in a minute, or you could spend a week talking about it. It's like, it can be that interesting if you just allow it to be. So Bob and Danielle, and then we'll keep going.
I would only add that, yes, in the second slide, the salvation is external, as though he were sort of adopting the idea of irresistible grace, that if I can't save myself, then maybe I can be saved through some external agency.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly. Danielle?
Yeah, I think I definitely see what you're pointing out here. I'm also really drawn to what he says at the opening, right? That it smells to heaven, almost that he has been found out, right? There is this idea that I can't hold this down. I have to acknowledge it. And then at the end of this slide, when he says, then I'll look up, it's almost as if he's resolving himself to, right, at that point say, okay, I'll try this. And in the meantime, offering all of these things, in my personal view and reading of it, as kind of railing against God. Like, aren't you there? Aren't you supposed to do this? This is what you say. This is what it's proclaimed in terms of what the purpose of prayer is. And yet you're not going to grant that to me. Like, who are you, God, to not do the things that you say you're going to do? Right. And then he says, well, I guess I'll give it a shot.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I think I love what you're saying, Danielle, because it gets at the sort of aggression that is also in a speech like this. Or I don't know how many of you guys have read John Donne's Holy Sonnets, where he's always combative. He's just like incredibly angry at God for not doing more for him, for forgetting him. And then at the end of the sonnet, he's always sort of apologizing for his petulance. But we have, as you say, there is a bit of, can't you do something for me here? Okay. I'm going to keep moving, as I say, just because I have a sense of what we need to get through. So let's Danielle, do you want to read this slide?
Sure. My fault is past, but oh, what form of prayer can serve my turn? Forgive me my foul murder? That cannot be, since I am still possessed of those effects for which I did the murder. My crown, my own ambition, and my queen. May one be pardoned and retain the offense?
Okay, so let's just think about what's happening here. So the last set of lines got him ready to pray, right? He starts by saying, pray can I not? I can't do it. He's now convinced himself, he's worked himself up to think, maybe I can do this, right? Maybe I'll be, given this help from God and so forth. But he still needs to pray. Like, he still needs to put words together and do this. And so now he's thinking about the logistics. So what's the problem? And this is sort of, I have it in bold because I think this is the ethical crux of this speech is here. May one be pardoned and retain the offense. So what is happening that he needs to kind of work through. Daniel?
I think that there is an implicit solution here, but I could be wrong. It doesn't seem like he actually entertains that solution for any length of time. The solution is to not have those things anymore, to give up the crown, to give up his queen. He could go be a hermit or a monk, or I mean, there is a solution. It seems as if that's implicitly here, but he doesn't consider acting on it even for a moment.
Absolutely. I mean, you're absolutely dead on right. And I love that he calls them those effects. That's a really interesting term here, the effects for which I did the murder. David?
I just think that what he can't do is to be sorry. I mean, if you're going to be pardoned, you would only have to, I mean, that's a Catholic idea, but to go to, like, the one video that you forwarded us has Claudius speaking in front of a confessional booth.
Yeah.
The Kenneth Branagh one. And I thought that was interesting. But the idea that you're going to be forgiven means you have to be sorry. So he's saying, what form of prayer can serve my turn? Forgive me my foul murder? He can't even say that, like, because he doesn't really, because he's going to keep all the things that he got. He did the murder. He wants to be pardoned, but he doesn't want to be sorry.
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. I mean, it's a absolute ethical paradox, right? May one be pardoned and retain the offense. This is an impossible position, but that's what he wants. So, you know, it's childlike, really, right? That you want to keep the toys you just stole from the toy store, but you want to say you're sorry for having taken them, and that's really where he is. Rebecca, and then Michael, and then Miriam.
I mean, is it even his fault if he's been possessed by these effects? I think that's such an interesting word choice.
Mm-hmm.
That he's possessed and remains possessed and therefore cannot give them up.
Yeah, it is interesting that he says, I am still possessed, rather than, you know, I still possess. I mean, it's a very interesting argument,
you know, yeah.
But I think you're right to point that out. Michael, and then Miriam and Bob.
When I'm teaching this with my students and we get to that, may one be pardoned and retain the offense line, I always talk about, you know, if you rob the bank, do you just get to confess to the crime and keep the money? Like, eventually they're going to make you pay it back. There's a lot of theology throughout this, throughout the play, but especially in this speech. And I think one of the things that Claudius might be considering is like the idea of mortal sins versus venial sins, like the minor ones that you can be forgiven for, and then the more serious ones that there is no forgiveness for. And that's why I think when he looks at, you know, I can't just say a Hail Mary, you know, 10 Hail Marys and be done with this. Am I supposed to say something like, forgive me my foul murder? Like, obviously that's not a prayer that's going to work here. He's not sure even how to go about the process of confessing.
And that's such an important point, Michael, because he knows that. He gets that, right? He's sort of, it's hard not to read that line almost as ironic, as you suggested. What am I supposed to say? Forgive me my foul murder? I mean, he gets that it's going to take more than that. And so he's being incredibly honest, not sort of strategic. Miriam, and then Bob.
I do think there's something that maybe he doesn't get, though, which is when he says my fault is past, he actually, that's not true. Yeah. And he mentions that earlier on when he talked about my stronger guilt defeats my strong intent. Intent is a huge part of prayer, what God or the angels would understand. So one of his major faults is that his intent is completely corrupt.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very good point. What's interesting is the relation between the fault and the effects, right? So the actual act, the criminal act has passed, but the effect, the booty from that is still with him. Bob?
No, I just wanted to talk about effects just very briefly. It's almost like there's a little bit of an evasion in his saying effects, as though these are consequences of my act, as though he's not taking any responsibility. I mean, he does say for which I did the murder, but just to say that they were effects, as though they were sort of something that happened, I think he's trying to evade guilt almost.
Okay. Yeah, Katie, and then I want to move forward.
I don't know how to raise my hand. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Many years ago, an actress came to my school. She had taken a diary of a woman in South Carolina during the Civil War who was anti-slavery, and she performed these diaries, and it was fascinating. This woman who was in the middle of the Southern Confederacy was writing a diary about how much she hated slavery, and then the woman got to the entry in the diary where the woman said, I hate it so much, but I would like to keep just one slave. Pearl, I think, was its slave's name. And that has stuck with me, because she had been, saying how much she really, disliked it, but she needed to just have that one woman with her if she could keep it.
Yeah, that's very powerful. Okay. All right, so let's keep going. Let's see, maybe someone who hasn't spoken. Rachel, could you read this?
Sure. In the corrupted currents of this world, offence's gilded hand may shove by justice, and oft 'tis seen the wicked prize itself buys out the law. But 'tis not so above. There is no shuffling. There the action lies in his true nature, and we ourselves compelled even to the teeth and forehead of our faults to give in evidence.
Okay, so here, what Michael was talking about, the theology behind all this becomes very much at the forefront. And this is, this play is obviously haunted by this question of what is awaiting us in the life to come. This is the heart of, obviously, the to be or not to be soliloquy, which was just earlier in the same act, in Act 3. But let's just work our way through this. So in the corrupted currents of this world, offense's gilded hand may shove by justice, and oft 'tis seen the wicked prize itself buys out the law. But 'tis not so above. So what is he, let's just talk about that for a second, because this is a strong indictment. What is he saying there? Sharon?
Well, this
Sharon
is
and then Danielle.
This is something we see all the time, right? The whole idea of people with money are able to have a good result in their trial. The gilded hand may shove by justice. The difference here is like the wicked prize itself buys out the law. So if you commit a robbery and now you have all that money to pay for your expensive lawyer, right? I love these images of the gilded hand. That's just, and the shoving. But this is not something just in Shakespeare. We see this all the time. We're getting away with whatever.
Yeah, that's for sure. Okay, so we have an indictment of how justice versus his, King Lear is obsessed with this topic. I mean, this is something Shakespeare thinks a lot about. Rachel? Oh, we can't hear you, sorry.
I always do that. It sort of plays into the binaries that you were mentioning before, that he is like this creature of the corrupted world set against the kind of absolute accountability of heaven. And sort of, I don't know, well, I was sort of thinking about later when he talks about the soul struggling and is more engaged. I kind of feel like he's very much, that's part of why he is unable to pray, because he just recognizes himself as this, corrupted creature who can't escape.
Okay, or you're right. I mean, he recognizes that he's corrupt, and he recognizes that he lives in a corrupt world, right? That everything around him could work this way. Michael, and then Bob.
I don't know how much English common law had developed the rules of evidence by Shakespeare's day, but to me this sounds like, your Fifth Amendment right, where you can't be compelled to testify in a criminal court. In this world, you can't be forced to testify, and you can work your way past a criminal indictment. But up in heaven, you're compelled to give evidence of your faults. Like up in heaven, you can't avoid getting caught by just asserting your right against self-incrimination there. That's what it almost sounds like to me.
Yeah. This is the most religious play I think Shakespeare wrote. It's certainly very far up there. So we have here a kind of total reversal of what Macbeth says. I'm sure many of you teach Macbeth. So you'll remember Macbeth's, if it were done, when it is done, 'tis better to be done quickly, where he says that if he could, I just pulled it up just so I could get the line right, but he says, if the assassination could trammel up the consequence, that this blow might be the be all and end all here, he says, we jump the bank and show of time, we jump the life to come, he says. So I'd risk the life to come. Macbeth says, if I could just clear my conscience and get away with this here, I won't worry about the afterlife. Macbeth is obsessed with now, with the secular, with this world. This play is the opposite. This play is constantly thinking about what the ethical consequences of things are going to be in the afterlife. So I mentioned the to be or not to be soliloquy, where of course Hamlet says, that he would gladly kill himself if he could just know that there wouldn't be consequences coming. But what stops him from doing that is dread of something after death. So I find that line, but 'tis not so above, devastating, and sort of the key. And then it's really interesting that next line, Shakespeare does this pretty often. For example, the opening of Richard III, now is the winter of our discontent, right? He breaks up his I am, it can't be now is the winter, or can, but it loses all its force. But there is no shuffling, right? Up there's no evasion. There the action lies. We get this there, right? There the action lies in his true nature. We can't get away with anything in the afterlife. So there is a kind of ethical, theological system, even if there's not a secular realm that's going to have consequences. Bob, and then Mira.
I just wanted to add that, this image jumps to his lips because that's Claudius to a T. Might does make right. He can marry his sister-in-law. He can cover up his brother's death. He knows that for a fact. So at least down here,
Okay, Miriam?
I just have a question, which is, wasn't there the idea that through indulgences, religious people could buy forgiveness if they were very rich? So I don't know if indulgences were permitted for murder, for instance, but this might also be like a criticism of that particular legal part of the Catholic Church.
Okay, so you bring up a really interesting and important point, which is, I said this is the most religious of Shakespeare's plays. I should have said this is the most Protestant of Shakespeare's plays, except for one twist, which has a ghost from a Catholic purgatory who shows up. But this play is deeply Protestant, like theologically, and that's why I mentioned Luther also. So Luther's motivation, in effect, for the Reformation was to get rid of indulgences, right? The indulgences were the worst. And we had people going to Wittenberg in this play. I mean, this play is deeply Protestant in so many ways, except for, as I say, Luther's other big problem, which was connected to indulgences, was purgatory. He despised purgatory, said it was a total racket. And in this play, we have a ghost who stands up and says, I've just come from purgatory where my sins are being burned off all night long. So it is complicated, but I think it's clear that here the next world is representing something like real justice, and this world is actually the corrupt one. I know there are more people who want to talk, but I'm in the interest of making sure we get through the speech. I'm going to keep going, and then hopefully we can get to some of these questions as we finish. But I want to make sure we finish. Okay, so we end with this. We ourselves compelled, even to the teeth and forehead of our faults, to give in evidence. Okay, and then we have what then? Katie, could you read this?
What then? What rests? Try what repentance can. What can it not? Yet what can it when one cannot repent? Oh, wretched state! Oh, bosom black as death! Oh, limed soul, that, struggling to be free, art more engaged. Help, angels! Make assay! Thou, stubborn knees and heart with strings of steel, be soft as sinews of the newborn babe. All may be well.
Okay, so what's happening now? So he's just reconciled himself, and now what's going on here? Katie, do you still have your hand up, or was it from before? I don't know if you want to respond to that, but.
No, I was asking about, I wanted to ask about the pronouns in the last 4 lines of the last slide when he says his and our, and is that the person who's being tried in heaven? There's no shuffle. But that's a question for the last slide.
Okay, yeah, let's keep going, just because as I said, we only have 15 more minutes, and I want to make sure we finish this. So does anybody want to think about what's happening in this slide? Rachel, and then Daniel? Oh, we can't hear you.
I keep doing that. So for me, it really hinges on the limed soul that's struggling to be free, art more engaged, this sort of double entendre of engaged. And it kind of ties to sort of Hamlet's whole existence. I mean, because everybody here lives in this perpetual state of moral ambiguity. And once Hamlet finally makes a decision, then it's a complete disaster and everybody dies. So there's this, this idea that this struggle of, this kind of morally ambiguous struggle is sort of like the bedrock of their existence.
Okay, yeah, that's excellent. Thank you. Daniel and then John.
Yeah, I have a reflection on this slide that might relate to what Katie said about the previous slide as well, the pronoun that she mentioned. So one thing that I see here, I do see genuine suffering, help angels. It seems as if he does feel intense distress, and it's as if he has many different parts of his soul that are at war with each other, very similar to Hamlet. Hamlet is, I guess, on the side of justice in this play, but at the same time, he has so many offenses at his beck that it would be better off that he'd never been born, as he said. So I think one thing going on in this play is this almost schizophrenia of the soul, all of these warring factions within us, and I think that might be related to why he referred to his action itself in the last slide as with the pronoun his. So he referred to the action as his. So the actions themselves are alive. The forces which compel us to do them are alive. He's legitimately at the same time repentant, but there are parts of him that are stronger that are not repentant. And this war of these different parts of ourselves and our souls that are personified as almost being alive is very jarring alongside what seems to be legitimate distress from this character that we don't really feel very much affection for usually.
We don't, but I think your big point here is important, that, and I think both of the performances that I asked you guys to watch really get at this very deeply, that he's really suffering. This is not someone going through the motions of this. I mean, he's struggling. And I think one of the really interesting things that happens at this point of the speech, and this very often happens, it happens to Richard II, it happens to Richard III, when Shakespeare's villains or complicated characters start to fall apart, at the level of the lines start to fracture. So there's just lots of short, right? It keeps getting broken up, that the sort of flowing line is no longer functioning. John, and then Danielle, and then David.
Yeah, I think Rachel pointed out, actually, this was a question for Rachel. You said this, like the double meaning in engaged. And I was just curious what that meant for you, because that seems interesting to me, considering what happens afterwards, where he tries out using his body as a form of engagement for repentance, since it seems like his brain isn't working for him. And so I was wondering if that's like what you were getting at in terms of this embodiment of repentance, or what engagement, or was it like the Queen thing? I just wanted to follow up with you because it sounded cool.
Rachel, do you want to respond to that?
Sure. Engage, I just mean sort of like engaged, active, alive, involved versus being stuck in something. Like the more he tries to struggle against it, the more his soul tries to be free, the more stuck it is. Like,
Cool.
and that struggle is sort of like what kind of gives him life, keeps him engaged in the sort of sense that you say, oh, are you engaged in class or not? And also
Oh, that's cool. Okay.
And I mean, if you imagine the unpleasantness of being stuck in bird lime, you can imagine that the more you thrust around, or imagine being in molasses, right? That the more action that you make, the more frantic movement, the more you could get stuck. Okay, I can't remember. I think, was it you, David, or no? I think it was Danielle and then David. Go ahead.
So I'm just really struck that he calls to the angels to help him, right? So like biblically, there are different types of angels, but it sounds in some ways here as if he's calling on the warriors to come fight the battle for him. When just a moment ago, you know, he was definitely speaking to God, all powerful deity. But if you're going to actually ask for the penance and someone to help you, it would be the Christ. And so it's just interesting how he kind of shifts here of like, come take up your arms in some ways, right, against the things that are happening to me, and then he forces himself, right, to bow his knee.
Yeah, yeah. And it's also just back to the Protestant Catholic note, it's also against Protestant doctrine to call upon angels and saints to help with your prayers. You have to go straight to God. So this is an interesting moment. Okay, David, and then Rebecca and Michael.
I think Danielle was right when she said, and forces himself to do it. So for me, the whole part in the middle where he says, first he says, help angels, but then he says, make assay. When I first read it, I thought that meant make assay. I thought he was referring to the angels, but I think he's saying it to himself, make the attempt. So it reminded me of moments in Macbeth where it's time to act now. Okay, so then he says to himself, make assay. So like fake it till you make it, pretend to pray, bow stubborn knees and heart with strings of steel, be soft as sinews, all may be well. And then it says he kneels. It doesn't say he prays, he kneels. So he's telling his body to assume the position of praying, and then maybe he'll be able to. So make assay, he's saying it to himself, pretend to do it and we'll try. And then he fools Hamlet.
Yeah.
Soon after that, he fools Hamlet into believing that he's praying, whereas I sort of don't believe that he actually prayed.
Yeah, I mean, you've just hit on something so important, which I want to just take a moment to pull out. This is the same play, one act later, when Hamlet tells his mother, Gertrude, after he's, described the horror that is Claudius and how, inadequate a love object Claudius is. And she says, what can I do? You've cleft my heart in two. And he says, oh, throw away the worser part of it and live the pure. And then this is the important line, picking up on what you just said, David, assume a virtue if you have it not. Assume a virtue if you have it not. That's our fake it in much more eloquent terms, but assume a virtue if you have it not. Refrain tonight, and that shall lend a kind of easiness to the next abstinence. Okay, and so this gets at a huge question about prayer and devotional practice and behavior. It's the basis of CBT therapy versus psychoanalysis, and we can think of it in lots of different ways, but can you change from the outside? If I just put my knees in the right position, if I just take my prayer book and read the prayers, at a certain point, even if I didn't believe the Lord's Prayer 10 years ago, if I say it every day, if I say my Ave Marias and Padre, will it sink in, right? So that's what Claudius is attempting. It's what Aristotle in the Nicomachean Ethics, this is what he defines as ethos. Ethos is defined as habit. So ethics and habit are the same thing, right? That you become ethical by doing habitually ethical behavior. And so it doesn't matter if you believe what you're doing, because without needing to do anything, it will start to kind of take over. And that's what he's trying out. I think David is absolutely right that the make assay is directed to his body or to himself. Let me try. This whole time, if we think about what he's been doing, he's just trying to pray. It gets back to the very second line, pray can I not, right? How can I pray? And now he's going to try. Okay, I think it was Rebecca and then Sharon.
From the performer's point of view, and in terms of even forming habits or derailing oneself psychologically on lines, all of these S's that have to be said out loud on breath, one right after the other, right? Soul struggling, say stubborn strings of steel, but soft as sinews. And of course you wouldn't do it all in one breath, but it's a lot of it is part of these elongated thoughts, these sort of hard S's with these plosives oftentimes coming right after them as maybe an attempt to solidify those thoughts. I think was really
that's really nice. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Sharon.
What you were just saying a moment ago reminded me of the line when he was talking about what's the purpose of prayer. And the first option was to prevent you from getting into sin to begin with. And what I was thinking when we were talking about that slide, which I think connects here, is, well, who's to this issue of who he's blaming for what happened to him? Because if he's someone who was not prayerful before, then this issue of it being on him and knowing that it was on him before he ever committed the murder to begin with. I don't know if what I'm saying is making any sense, but I'm just linking back to that earlier.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, Michael, do you want to say something? Then I want to finish the speech.
You mentioned in the beginning that Claudius is actually a pretty good king. You know, he's able to head off that invasion from Norway in the beginning of the play.
Yeah.
And I noticed at the end of the speech, he falls back on imperatives, on commands. Now, I think it was David who said he's making those commands on himself. Make the attempt, and then he's got a command for his knees, bow, and then he's got a command for his heart, like be soft. So he's trying to like be kingly and issue imperatives.
Yeah.
But then he kind of ruins it with that final line, which is a conditional. Well, maybe it'll be okay if I can at least bow and give it a try.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I mean, he's issuing imperatives, he's issuing commands, and he sounds, he's sort of in the position of Pharaoh. I mean, there's a lot of Old Testament stuff running through this entire speech. We started with Cain and Abel, then he quoted lines of Isaiah about washing his hands as white as snow, and now, Pharaoh's punishment is his heart is hardened. And the question is Claudius actually capable of repenting, right? Is he so hardened a criminal? That's what Shakespeare's exploring. What can happen here? But then let's just finish up this scene because it is so incredibly interesting. So this is all happening. We're deep in Claudius's mind. We're with him. We're down on the knees, right? He gets himself in the position of prayer. And then Hamlet enters, and Hamlet, who's so good at reading everybody, he can tell what Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are up to. He can write, totally blows it and misreads this entire thing. And so let's just quickly, I'll just read it just to get it done. I'm sorry that the title thing is somehow here. Hold on. Okay. So Hamlet comes in and he says, now might I do it? Now he's a praying, and now I'll do it. And so he goes to heaven, and so am I revenged. That would be scanned. A villain kills my father, and for that, I, his sole son, do the same villain send to heaven. Oh, this is hire and salary, not revenge, and so on. So what is the problem? Am I then revenged to take him in the purging of his soul when he is fit and seasoned for his passage? No. And then he goes on and says, basically, I better wait for a moment when he's in his incestuous sheets, when he's playing dice, when he's swearing, or about some act that has no relish of salvation in it. Okay, no relish of salvation in it. And then Claudius comes in with this devastating conclusion to the scene. My words fly up, my thoughts remain below. Words without thoughts never to heaven go. So what has just happened here? Anybody want to try to explain? Why does Hamlet get this so wrong? That's one question. This is his chance. This is his moment, right? If he could kill Claudius now, as someone said earlier, none of the tragedies would would happen. This thing would be finished. But instead, he misreads this, right? He sees him as sincere. Michael, did you want to say something? Oh no, your hand isn't up anymore.
Actually,
okay, go ahead.
What always bothered me about what Hamlet says in that speech is, just 2 scenes ago in the To Be or Not to Be speech, he was like, oh, I'm so uncertain about what happens after we die. I have no idea what's going to happen. But in this speech, he's so certain that if you die when you're praying, you go to heaven. And that to me seemed, that's always seemed like another contradiction in Hamlet's character.
Very good.
That's one of the things that makes him so fascinating, but also makes him so frustrating. Like how do we figure this guy out with these contradictions? Why were you so uncertain 2 scenes ago, but now you're so sure that if I kill him now, he's going to go to heaven. So I better wait until I can, catch him in bed with my mother, and then he'll go to hell.
Right. I mean, and some people would say, Michael, that he's never going to kill Claudius. In other words, that he's going to have an excuse. There are a few hands from people we haven't heard from, so I'd like to just give them a chance to talk. Emily.
Oh, I mean, I think he's thinking about his dad. He's in the play, seen his dad suffering. He's doing this for his dad. It's not as though his dad has come down on some cloud, peacefully said, oh, by the way, I'm in heaven, everything's fine, but could you do this for me? His dad's in purgatory, suffering and clearly in pain. And in this world, he believes, oh, I'll send him to heaven as a way of justice. But that isn't what he did to his brother.
Yeah, no, absolutely, right. His father, remember, describes being killed unanointed, unhouseled, without having his last rites. So he has to suffer, and then he'd be, but the point that Michael raises that, he's all of a sudden so confident that if you're praying, doesn't matter how many people you've murdered. David Wilson, we haven't heard from you.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I would just question, why would he risk it here? I mean, even if he, in To Be or Not to Be, he says we don't know what waits after death, but I mean, in a sense he does, because the ghost of his father has come back and told him that I'm coming from beyond to tell you how horrible it is. But I mean, he doesn't know that Claudius hasn't prayed, right? So, and he also doesn't know that he's about to accidentally kill Polonius and have all these other things happen that are going to make it impossible for him to get near the king again to kill him. So, I mean, it seems like, I guess it doesn't seem that unreasonable to me that he would think that there's at least a chance that in this moment he might, be doing exactly what he says here, that killing him would then send him to heaven purified.
Okay. There are a couple more hands, and I know we're officially out of time, but I'm happy to stay for a couple more minutes. So let's hear a couple more things, and then we'll wrap up. Katie, and then Bob, and then David.
What was just said: seems, appearances, assumes. So not everybody gets everything right, and Hamlet challenges them in the first act about I seem to be, I am. And then you, Professor Targoff, said something about assume to be this. And now we see Hamlet mistaken this appearance of praying. So there's a lot of dramatic irony, really, that Shakespeare has done for us.
Yeah, absolutely. Bob?
Just quickly, Hamlet is obsessed with doing the exactly right thing. So it doesn't strike me as that odd that he would hesitate. Part of the revenge tragedy is that you have to do to your villain at least as bad as what was done to your kinsman. So Hamlet doesn't want to do Claudius any favors. But then, of course, he stabs the Arras, and what is it, the next scene? So he changed his mind in a hurry.
Yeah, absolutely. John, and then Miriam, and then David.
I was just, I agree that it's like, all right, he really wanted to do this right, and so he's a little bit concerned. I think he also takes appearances seriously, even though he's able to see like beneath them. Like further to that line where you say the assume a virtue, he says the monster custom, who all sense doth eat of habits evil, is angel yet in this, that to the use of actions fair and good, he likewise gives a frock of livery that aptly is put on, which you could say is like the prayer movement too, sort of as this like frock. And so he's like, oh, maybe he's actually, and then earlier in the play, he was accused of having unmanly grief. And so maybe in some way he's hoping that like, he's not the only one who's like capable of guilt or feeling guilty. And he recognized that at least if he's not praying sincerely out of the right reasons, he at least feels something in that moment. And he's like, no, I don't want him even to like be admitting that he feels kind of bad at this point.
Yeah, that's right. No, I think that's right. That's really interesting. Actually, Miriam, you had your hand up, I think, before David.
This is just sort of a question, but earlier on in this scene where it said, whereto serves mercy, but to confront the visage of offense. It seems here like maybe God was merciful. So Hamlet made a mistake, possibly because God was merciful. Because, you know, it seemed like he was praying, and that's why he wasn't harmed in that moment. So it's true that thoughtless prayer without intention is meaningless, but, you know, the idea if one goes through with ritual every day and does bow and does all the things that you're supposed to do, that maybe it becomes real.
I mean, it's certainly, that is one idea about ethical practice or behavior. What's interesting is Shakespeare didn't need to put these two lines in this scene. Like if we didn't have these two lines, we just wouldn't know. And that would allow for a lot of interesting possibilities. But the fact that Shakespeare makes absolutely devastatingly clear that this didn't work, that this was a botched prayer, that it didn't happen, that's worth our thinking about. I think it's important. David Wilson, and then Danielle, Sharon.
I didn't have my hand up that time.
Oh, it's still up, I guess, from before. Sorry, Danielle.
Sure. So yeah, there's also something here where the image of him kneeling, right, and that picture of the piety, even though it is not founded, in some ways is kind of calling on Hamlet's soul though, right? Like he recognizes something within himself and connects with this, and it's almost as if he's kind of drawing inward. It's not even about Claudius any longer. It's more about my soul and what I'm thinking, and can I do this? Because he's, you know, he's referenced as being proud. He's referenced as being many things, but he is not referenced, you know, he's not a killer. He's looking for the out, even though he wants revenge because he's torn with, yes, I need to avenge my father, but in the same respects, I also recognize my own mortality and my own humanity.
Yes.
And so I think it's actually him kind of warring with himself, not even so much that he's missed it, but that, you know, he goes inward for a second and considers, you know, what it would mean for his soul.
Okay, that's really interesting. David de Blasio and then Sharon, and then I think we might want to wrap up.
I think earlier in the class, you suggested that it was fruitful to compare Claudius and Hamlet in some ways. And I hadn't thought of it that way before. Isn't this sort of like an echo of what just happened, what just Claudius went through, which was the intent to pray, but the inability to pray? All of a sudden, Hamlet immediately has the intent to kill, but the inability to kill. And then as one of our classmates suggested, you know, Claudius never really intended to pray. He never really was sorry. I think it forces you to question whether or not Hamlet ever really was going to be able to go through with it, because couldn't he just kick Claudius over and then end his prayer and then kill him? I mean, it makes you question whether or not Hamlet actually had the intent.
Yeah, I mean, it is absolutely the case. Just if you look at the very next, right after Hamlet says the play, when he comes up with the idea that he's going to stage a play, and by watching Claudius watch the play, he's going to figure out, right, if he's guilty. And he says at the very end of Act 2, Scene 2, the very last line is, the play's the thing wherein I'll catch the conscience of the king, right? So he announces that he's on a hunt to get to Claudius's conscience. The very next line in the play is Claudius saying to Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, and can you by no drift of circumstance get from him why he puts on this confusion, right? Can't you figure out what's going on inside of Hamlet? The two of them are on parallel tracks, or they're more like colliding tracks, but they're both obsessed with getting inside the other person. And what's so fascinating, I think, here is that while watching the play creates a transparent image of guilt on Claudius's face, right? Hamlet sees it and he says, I'm sure now of this. Watching him pray is completely murky. He can't get purchase from it. It eludes him. Sharon?
Yeah, you use the phrase, the performance of prayer at the beginning of this. And I feel like with everything you just said, what we see is that Claudius and Hamlet are very successful in their performances, whereas the other people like Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are not. And this is the reason that they are such worthy adversaries in this play. I also totally agree with Danielle. I've always thought that Hamlet simply did not want to kill. He doesn't want to be a killer. He didn't want to kill himself at the beginning. He doesn't like that his father was killed, yes, until he gets to the next scene and shoves the sword through the arras. I know. But I actually wanted to ask you a question. And you said at the beginning or early, you said the thing about this speech is that the soliloquy is that this is where he finally admits his guilt. But I've always thought that he admitted his guilt right before the to be or not to be speech with his, he talks about his guilty conscience.
Yeah,
and,
you're right. It's where he expounds on his guilt, where we get insight into it. I mean, we know he's guilty and you're right. He does admit it, but this is where we see it. This is Shakespeare's sort of gift to Claudius because he gives him this moment to kind of open up, right? And as I say, that's just a very weird decision on Shakespeare's part. The only just one thing I want to say, because we didn't get to mention it, but if you were trying to put all this stuff together as you were reading the play, I recommend you go look at Hamlet's "Oh, what a rogue and peasant slave am I" soliloquy, because in that speech, he actually is incredibly jealous and angry about what actors can do with their performance. This play is just obsessed with performance. So when Claudius says, if I can just bow my knees wherever it is, I can't get the, get down on my knees and assume this position, I should be able to kind of effect the right posture to pray. What really upsets Hamlet or makes him feel so inadequate is that, the players, the actors are weeping over things that don't matter to them. But they're not faking it. I mean, that's when he says, what's Hecuba to him, or he to Hecuba that he should weep for her. He says that the player is, and this is a wonderful phrase, forcing his soul to his whole conceit, that he's taking his soul and adjusting it to his conceit, to his posture. So if Claudius could do that, so if that's how Shakespeare understands performance, how Hamlet understands, if Claudius could do that, simply by assuming the posture, by getting your body in the right place, he should be able to pray. And that's why I think this is Shakespeare being super polemical. Shakespeare's saying theater works better than church, right? Theater works better than religion. You can put yourself in a position of prayer, you can say the words, and look what happened. I mean, these two lines are totally gratuitous or unnecessary. And that's when Shakespeare's always at his most interesting, when things don't need to be there. We don't need to know that Hamlet misread Claudius's prayer for the play to go on, but he gives us this little gift, which absolutely denies the assume a virtue if you have it not, or force your soul to your own conceit, all of these other behavioral tips. But in prayer, it's ineffective. It's failed. It's not faked, but it's failed. Anyway, it's almost 5:30, so I know we were supposed to stop at 5:15. And I already confessed that I could talk about this forever, so I will let everybody go. I'm not sure if there's any official wrap up.
Yes, I'll just jump in very quickly to say that we would all be game, Ramie Targoff, for the 5-hour version of this, because clearly the 1-hour version wasn't anywhere near long enough. But we want to thank you so much for being here and for this really exciting, rich, and wonderful conversation. So thank you very much. And thank you to all of the teachers who were here today.